this base of Medrash and be sitting in front of such a choshev olam. And I say that because over the years I've watched the graduates of the center program, and based on history, guys, you've got a great future ahead of you. And because we're just a few days away from Maimon HaSinai, just a few days away from Shavuos, with your permission, I'd like to look at certain aspects of it, and hopefully we'll learn something, and more than just learn something, well, you'll find out about that soon. So on page 960 in the Chumash, which corresponds to Perek Daled, Pasuk Yud Aleph, whenever I teach, I try as hard as I can to have a sefer in front of everybody. Two reasons. Number one, Oisius Machkimus, you see the letters, you see the words, you're likely to become more wise. And second of all, if I keep getting you guys to move your fingers and focusing, then you're less likely to fall asleep. Now, I traveled in from England yesterday, so if I fall asleep, Rabbi Wiener, you're thank you, Baruch Hashem. So, Pasuk Yud Aleph, and it's describing now the experience of Har Sinai, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu drew Klal Yisrael close, V'chikravun v'tamdun tachas hahar, and the Jewish people stood under the mountain. V'ahar boiveish adleiv hashemayim, and the fire which flew out of this mountain was extraordinary all the way up to heaven. And this is going to be very important. Two important points here. Number one is fire, energy pulsating from that mountain. But what's interesting is, and even if you look at the English, you stood at the foot of the mountain. Now you could have seen that pasuk quite easily and said, you approached the mountain, you were by the mountain, but some reason the Torah tells me I'm standing by the mountain. And what we need to do as budding Talmid Chachomim is not only learn Shas and Poskim in depth, but every time we come across a sugya and chumash to try and understand depth as well. And you'll see something quite extraordinary. For some reason, when it comes to Maimon HaSinai, when it comes to the giving of the Torah on Sinai, the word stand, amudah, amida, is repeated time and time again. In fact, some of you may have a minhag, a tradition, that at the end of davening, you say sheish schiras. Some people want to remember 6 things every day, like the fact that Miriam spoke Lashon Hara, what happened to her. Or don't forget, we came out of Mitzrayim, and included in them is Zechiras Maimon HaSinai. You have to remember, it doesn't say remember Kabbalah Torah, it's amazing. The 6 Zechiras is remember Maimon HaSinai, and we bring a pasuk. And the pasuk is, in the same parak, V'adati levanecha levanecha yom asher amadata livnei Hashem. The day you stood on Har Sinai. And very often in the Pesukim where it's talking about standing, you could have got away with a description which didn't focus on standing. Let me quickly jump to a few more. Page 404, which corresponds to Shmos. Page 404, the giving of the Torah on Har Sinai, the first description here. 404, giving of the Torah on Har Sinai. Perek Yud Tes, Pasuk Yud Zayin. Vayetze Moshe, Perek Yud Tes, Pasuk Yud Zayin, page 404. Vayetze Moshe es ha'am, likros Elokim. And guess where the Jewish people? V'yisyatzvu tachas hahar. There's another word for standing. V'yisyatzvu, they stood mitachas hahar, and mitachtis hahar, they stood under the mountain. Why do, first of all, they stood under the mountain. I'm sure there's lots of divrei Torah you've already heard about standing under the mountain. But nevertheless, we get a very similar word describing Klal Yisrael. Another couple of quick examples, and then we're going to try and understand and compare and contrast. What quick on page 412, which is Perek Chof Posuk Tesvav. V'cholam, page 412, Tesvav. V'cholam Romas HaKolos. And the experience of what was going on Har Sinai was so extraordinary that all of our senses turned upside down. We saw what was normally heard. Vesalapidim, veskol hashofar, fire, thunder, like extraordinary. V'esahar oshen, again, oshen. Vayam, v'yanu, v'yamdu mirachok. And they stood at a distance. You can say, and they were there. They were at a distance. Why do you have to keep on telling me they stood at a distance? And one more, just to give you the excitement of what's going on over here. If we carry on with these Pesukim, we see in Perek Chof, where we're up to Chof, and then it's Yud Aleph. No, I think we have to go back a little bit for this 1 second. No, a bit further forward. I think I've got a smudge on the way here in the airport. But anyway, you get the bottom line. You get the bottom. We're standing. Well done. It reminds me of the story. Once the Panovich Rov came fundraising, and into America, and one of the parents brought his little 8-year-old kid to come and hear the Panovich Rov. The Panovich Rov spoke in Yiddish, and afterwards the father introduces the boy, and the Panovich Rov says, "Tell me, do you understand Yiddish?" He says, "No." He says, "Do you understand the drasha?" He says, "I think what the Rebbe was saying is he needs money for his programs." And the Rav said, "You understood the drasha much better than anybody else." But what's extraordinary is this language of Amida. And we need to try and understand why. And it's particularly strange because you would say that they always stand. When great events take place, they always stand. But it's not true. If you have a little look in Parsha Shmini, when the Mishkan was originally inaugurated, that's page 590, and it describes there the avodah of the Levium and the early avodah of inaugurating the Mishkan. And there's this incredible moment where HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as if to say, starts the first fire that took place on the Mizbeach on Pesach Chof Daled, Pasuk Chof Daled. V'teitze eish milifnei Hashem, a fire comes out, v'tochel al Mizbeach, and all that had been prepared on the Mizbeach was burnt up. Es ha'olah v'es chalovim, v'yar kol ha'am, and all the people saw. And on the one hand, they were over the moon. They're so glad, Baruch Hashem, it's happening. But what was their response to this extraordinary event? They fall on their face. So when the Mishkan is inaugurated, a great moment, and there's fire, there's lots of fire, just like on Har Sinai there was fire. Admittedly, here the fire is coming to burn up the korbanos, but there was also lots of energy flying around. But here they fall on their face. I'll give you a couple more examples just to get the flavor of it. If you jump to the Haftarah on Kisisa, and we always like people to learn the Haftarahs as well and understand the extraordinary lessons which are there. Kisisa is actually on page 1160. It's one of those Haftarahs that is not read that often. And the reason it's not read that often, it often falls around Parshas Shkolim, and we end up saying Parshas Shkolim. But nevertheless, it's a Haftarah, it's a piece of Nach which is well worth understanding and knowing. And there was a time in Klal Yisrael's history when on page 1160, thank you, and we're going to jump to 1162 as well. And there was a time in Klal Yisrael history where there was a battle between the Nevi'ah Baal, the prophets of Baal, who unfortunately corrupted the thoughts, the hearts and minds of many of our brothers and sisters, and Eliyahu Hanavi on Har Carmel. It's a famous Haftarah, it's a famous idea which is discussed amongst Meforshim because Eliyahu did some unusual things at that time as well. And one of the unusual things he did is he made a Mizbeach, and he was willing to make a duel with the Nevi'ah Baal. A duel. Let's see whose God is greater. Maybe your God's sleeping, that's why he's unable to perform today. Let's see which one is greater. And on page 1162, as we come to the climax of this extraordinary event, a climax, by the way, which is mentioned on Yom Kippur, which we'll come to in just a minute's time, on Posuk Lamed Ches 1162, Vatipol Eish, Vateichel Es Oila, and a fire once again, as we mentioned, 1162, Posuk Lamed Ches, Vatipol Eish, Hashem, Vateichel Es Oila Es Eitzim, and a fire comes down. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends, and it eats up the oila, and it eats up the wood, and it eats up the avonim, and it eats up all the dirt around it. And also, Eliyahu puts water around his korban, as if to say, fire and water usually don't marry together too well. Watch this happen. And the whole thing was licked dry, clean. Amazing. What was the response to the people there? And the people saw, and they fell on their face. Mamad Sinai, they stood up. Repetition. Mizbeach, Shmini, they fall on their face. Mizbeach, Har Carmel, Eliyahu, Nevi'ah Baal, Vayipla paneim, they fall on their face. Vayomer Hashem hu Elokim, which is how we end in the Ashkenazim. It's how we end Yom Kippur, interestingly. Hashem hu Elokim, and there was a cry and a scream throughout. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's in charge, no question about that. And since we're talking about Yom Kippur, it's very interesting. My father-in-law, Zichrono Livrocha, even into his 90s, was makbid to stand all of Yom Kippur. I mean, he went to sleep at night, but he stood up. And extraordinary individual. But there was one part of davening he always didn't stand up. In the middle of the Yom Kippur davening, the Kohanim and all of us, we re-experience the experience that took place in Beis HaMikdash, and we lie flat on the floor. Sfarim do it as well? Yeah. Well, everybody at Baruch Hashem. Yeah, carpet, floor, yeah, interesting, shilas. Carpet, floor, whatever it may be, tissues, and you lie on the floor. That means in the middle of your Yom Kippur davening, zoomp! On this high point, this extraordinary experience of reconnecting with the energy of that day, we reenact on one level the avoid of the, and what we do, we fall on the floor. So we're not short of events in Jewish history we fall on the floor. And what's interesting is even when there's fire, even when there's Giloi Shechina, as if to say, the revelation of the Almighty, we're falling on the floor, but not by Maimed Hasinai. Now, there are many approaches to this. I've chosen to take a particular approach based on teachings that I've heard beforehand. And we always search for questions. By the way, Rav Hirsch, Shimshon Hirsch, always points out very often, not always points out, often points out where you can see in the Sedras themes which go throughout a Sedra, where you see in events themes that go throughout the events. And if you can see the connection of those themes, it's quite extraordinary how you can get underlying messages. So I'd like to start with a very interesting use of the word Amidah, and that is the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. The first Mishnah in Pirkei Avos is very important because the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, which I'll say out aloud, you may have access to it, is of course Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph. Moshe Kibbel Torah Misinai. And it's a description of how Torah gets passed on from generation to generation. And here we are in this Beis HaMedrash, and you're part of that Messiah. You're part of that ongoing tradition. And even though Rabbi Wiener is Baruch Hashem, today's Rosh Hashiva, he'll tell you that I was Zoicha to learn under, and he'll give you a list of Choshev Gedolim and Rabbonim who he learnt under. And if you were to ask them, they'll say, yes, I was a Rosh Hashiva, but you want to know who I learnt from? And as the Rambam shows us, you can go back generation after generation after generation. And as I mentioned in my introduction, and you're the next generation, guys. You're part of that Masorah, you're part of that tradition. And in any which way that you can learn and understand and appreciate that responsibility, you're passing something on. Moshe Kibbel Torah Misinai, and you're not just passing something on, you're passing everything on. Everything on. Umasar Yeshua, and he passed it on to Yeshua, and Yeshua Lizakanim. We'll see more about that later. Unavim Masar La'anshe Knesses HaGedola. Heim Omer Shlosha Devarim. And the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, telling us of those who continued the Masorah, they taught us three things. Again, this is essential. That if the Anshe Knesses HaGedola are being written here in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos of having taught us three things, those three things are going to be pivotal in our understanding of Torah. First one is having Masunim Badim. We don't have time to go into detail exactly what that means, but it means be deliberate in judgment, be careful when you make a decision. But when you've made that decision, you've got to act on it. Don't make it too fast. Consult, consider, but make a decision. And for all of us Latin scholars, and as I look around the room, I'm sure we're four of them, you'll see that the word precision, incision, and decision are all connected to each other. You have to learn to make a cut with a decision. If you spend your life holding on to all the things that have been, a decision is sometimes you have to learn to make a cut. In Lashon HaKodesh, part of there are many words for decision, but one of them is you go to Rav for a psak. Have you ever thought of the Hebrew word a posuk? A posuk finishes. And if you're eating and you have too big a gap after you've eaten, you've made a hefsek. You've got to start all over again, right? the same letters as the word psak, which means a decision, clear cut, move on. If you rearrange them, unfortunately, they make the word sofek. You have to move out of the world of confusion, and once you've done your diligent judicial investigations, you make a decision. You got to move on. Not an easy thing for anybody to do, but you'll see that if you're able to do it, you'll be part of that tradition. But what's fascinating for us in our conversation today is v'ha'amidu samidim harbe. The advice that the Anshe HaKnesses HaGedolah says, in English they translate it here as develop many disciples. But we're going to translate it, v'hemidu tamidim harbe, cause a lot of tamidim to stand up. V'hemidu, cause a lot of, for some reason, the Anshe HaKnesses HaGedolah says that Torah has got to be a standing experience. And not only have you got to be standing at Har Sinai to experience it, your job is to help and ensure that other people can stand by themselves. And as the Meforshim point out, the goal of a Talmud, the goal of a student, is to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. And one of the goals of the center program is, I don't know if you've ever been to a sports game, but you have players and spectators. The goal of the center program is you guys are going to be players, not spectators. And the halacha is, get the guys to stand up. Get the guys to stand up and learn to stand up on their own. When we were in yeshiva, the founding Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Schiller, together with Rabbi Mendel Weinbach, I remember Rabbi Mendel Weinbach saying to me many, many years ago, you know that you've been successful if the children of your Talmidim are able to stand up on their own right. And you know you've been successful when the Talmidim, Baruch Hashem, are able to stand up on their own right as well. The Hemidu stand up. And it's very interesting because even though I'm sitting here today, and even though you're sitting there in front of me, the Medrash says from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu until the death of Rabbi Gamliel, that was a long time, the Talmidim always stood and the teacher would sit. When you're receiving Torah, you can't sit and chill. When you're receiving Torah, you've got to be standing. The experience is Maimin Sinai, active participation, actively involved, actively in debate, actively listening to the extraordinary experience which is going on. And it's also fascinating that if you jump to page 968, you'll see that in the description of Moshe Rabbeinu describing Mamid Sinai, says something very interesting. 968, here we go. Look at these pasukim. Just before we get the Aseret Sedibros, Vayikra Moshe el Kol Yisrael, he's telling them what happened. Vayoma Shema Yisrael, listen Yisrael, es hachukim ve'es hamishpatim asher nochi dover b'oznechem, everything that you've learnt, hayom u'lemadatem esam u'shmatim lasis, Hashem lekeinu krosim on a bris b'chorev, it describes the history. Lo es havasena kros Hashem es a bris azos ki yitonu anachnu. And then listen to the ways Moshe Rabbeinu describes it. Ponim b'ponim dibar Hashem b'mechom. This was a face-to-face experience. And the fire, Onochi oimeid ben Hashem v'nechem, and I, the teacher, stood between you and between HaKadosh Baruch Hu. My job as the teacher was to pass on the information. And you experienced it mamish like a chavrusa, ponim b'ponim. Now, we've got a little bit weaker, so we sit, but the message of standing is so powerful and so deep. In fact, as Chazal point out, the whole Torah is about standing, from Aleph to Tov. First letter is Aleph, the last letter is Tov, the middle letter is a Mem, and of course, they build the word Emes. Aleph, Mem, Tov, from beginning to end, Aleph base. The letter Aleph stands on 2 feet. The letter Mem's got a firm basis. The letter Tov stands on 2 feet. From the beginning and the end of Torah, the Torah itself as MS stands on 2 feet. And we too have got to be able to stand up and be strong. And how do you call a person to a Sefer Torah? Ya Amoid! Now I bet you've heard this a few times before. And then did you want to ask something? Yeah.
This logic, why during the Torah reading on Shabbos, you don't have to stand?
See the Mishnah Berurah for more information. Can I set you some homework? Yeah. You don't have to, but see what he writes there. I'll let you, I'll let Rabbi Wiener and you and your Rebbes investigate it, but you asked good. You asked good. Well done. It's an honor to be in the presence of such a question. Well done. By the way, I'm looking forward to seeing your Sefer one day because you ask good questions. That's the beginning of it. So, no pressure. But I'll give you my email address to send me the first copy. Ya'amod. You ever thought about that? They don't say Bohena. I mean, it's a bit more. It's a bit less respectful. They say Ya'amod, stand up. Yeah, I'll tell you why Ya'amod. And if you look in the Mishnah Berurah, you'll see something very incredible. The person who's laning the Torah can't sit down. They have to stand up. Borden halacha. And the person who's standing next to them has got to be standing as well. Very interesting. This is mind-blowing. It's brought in halacha because kaviyachol, the person who's standing up, if we have any gaboim here, kaviyachol, it's like HaKadosh Baruch who's calling up everybody to stand by the Torah. This is your re-experience. This is your reenactment with Kabbalah HaTorah. It's not that you're sitting here, the Torah being read. It's your re-experience, Maimon Sinai. And the person who's laning is Moshe Rabbeinu, as if to say. And he's reading the Torah as it was read to him, as part of this Messiah, all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu as he passes from generation to generation. And I'm standing here being called up to the Torah, and I'm standing not just passive, I'm active, I'm standing and listening and experiencing, connecting with it. And again, now is not the time to go into this in detail, but if you see all of the aspects of why we open the Aron HaKodesh and why we say certain tefillahs, Brik Shmei, at the time of the Aron HaKodesh is saying, and why we say Vayehi bin Saron, why we use those psukim, why we say the Tehillim that we say when we're taking out a Sefer Torah and putting it back, it's all connected on different ways to an experience of not being a spectator, being actively involved in this experience. Vayehi bin Saron Vayom Asher, when Moshe Rabbeinu would carry around, when the Torah would carry, we was going to see him Sefer Bamidbar, the Torah would go, a tefillah is made out to say, get rid of all the enemies because they would flee. You'll see that the Mefarshim go into great details. What's the possible connection of saying those pesukim? But I'll let you do your homework. It's mamish worth investigating. And you'll see when you're called to the Torah, you'll say something very interesting. You'll say in the Birchas HaTorah that you say at your Aliyah, I read them to you now because it's so extraordinary when we just stop and think what we're saying. Asher b'chabonu mikol amim. We're part of a chosen people, a chosen nation. When we're different from anybody, v'nosen lonos Torah, v'nosen lonos Torah. So, Baruch Hashem, Baruch Atah Hashem, nosein haTorah. We say at that point when we get, you are the giver of the Torah. Not you gave the Torah, Kodesh Baruch Hu, you're giver of the Torah. And I'm standing on Maimon Sinai right now when I have my Aliyah and I'm receiving the Torah again. Because you're the giver of Torah, not you gave. It's not history. It's a re-experience, it's a reconnection. Every time you're opening a Shas, every time you're learning a Mishnah, every time you're opening a Chumash or a Sefer, there's a Maimon Sinai. And it behooves us to realize and recognize that even if we're sitting, we in our heart and hearts have got to be part of a process taking us all the way back. And I don't know if you ever thought about this as well, but when we say Birchas HaTorah, that we say in the morning, fascinatingly, we say, Asher Kirishon Mitzvah Sovet Sivonu, La Asoik B'divrei Torah. Now, the Sfarim say it slightly different. Yeah, okay, slightly different. But nevertheless, and there's a debate on that, but the same principle is there. B'divrei Torah is that we're actively involved in this experience. We're not just listening. According to the Ashkenazim, La Asok B'divrei Torah is, in business, is called an asek. You buy from here, you sell to here, you hope to make a profit. La'asok b'divrei Torah. I'm not passive. I'm not listening. I'm a player in this. I'm active. And one of my Rabbeim used to say, very interesting, V'harevna, and we have a special tefillah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that I want this to be sweet. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, daven b'chol libo, we daven with our whole heart. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I want these words to be sweet and special to me, because I know how important they are. And I have a special tefillah. And then we say something extraordinary. I'm going to read out the English, how it's translated here. Sweeten the words of your Torah in our mouth, in the mouth of your people, in the house of Israel. Now, I'm saying a bracha today over my learning of Torah. So why am I saying in your Torah, in our mouth, in the mouth of your people, the house of Israel? May we and our offspring, and the offspring of your people, the house of Israel, all of us know your name, your son. Why am I talking about generations? And the answer is I'm talking about generations because I've got to get this right to know and understand where I come from and where I've got to take this to as well. Where I've got to take it to as well. The Gemara in Tana says something extraordinary. And I have to say how grateful we are to all of you for being here today. The Gemara in Tana says that Torah is compared to lots of things, compared to water, compared to fire. The Gemara says just like a small little match, a small little chip of wood is able to create a great big fire, so too the Talmud, I'm not suggesting anybody here is small, please forgive me, but the Talmud who wants to learn Torah, do you know what you're doing for your teachers? You're making big fires out of your teachers because you're forcing them to learn it and understand it so that they can teach it better to you as well. And you'll see something quite extraordinary. If you jump to Parshas Mishpatim, you'll see in Parshas Mishpatim a fascinating description. And I want to show you an idea that I heard here in the yeshiva 43 years ago. I can't remember everything I heard in the yeshiva 43 years ago, just remember. Don't worry about the flying tissue, that's okay. Just look at the beginning of Parshas Mishpatim. Page 416. Ve'ela Mishpatim. So this is after Ma'amad Sinai. Like what's going to happen after Ma'amad Sinai? Ve'ela Mishpatim asher tosim lifneim. And these are the laws you have to place in front of them. So Chazal are bothered by this Loshen. Moshe Rabbeinu has received the Torah HaSinai. Now you're going to start explaining it to everybody so they understand what's going on. Says Rashi, and this is an idea I heard from Rabbi Milevsky, Zichrono Livrocha. I think 43, 44, 45, 46, a long time ago, a long time ago. Asher tosim lifneim, that you have to place in front of him. Rashi's bothered. Amla Kodesh Baruch Hu Moshe, what's this word? You place Torah in front of them. Says Rashi, Lo tale al dotcha loima eshna lehem aperek v'halocha beis or gimel pamim ad she'yisidur b'fiyim k'mishtan. Don't say when I teach, I've got to make sure that the people know it parrot fashion. You can repeat this to me black and white. Vayom Hashem, Vayom Hashem. That's not going to be enough. You can't do that. And I'm not going to bother myself to really go in detail and in depth. That's why I'm saying to you, Moshe, Asher Tosim Lifneim, you've got to place it in front of them like a beautifully laid table. It's not enough just to be a teacher who teaches parrots. You've got to teach a teacher who teaches human beings. And you've got to help them understand it as best as you're able and as best as they're able as well. Because this is our life, Kihem Chayenu. And we are standing on Mount Sinai, and the job is to stand up pupils so that they can understand and appreciate on the depths of it. And by the way, when I was here in Ohr Somayach all those years ago, we used to have a chabura once a week with Rabbi Rosenberg. And he used to say to us, he said, bring me all the questions you had this week, and we'll discuss some of the questions you had this week. Fine. And he said to me then something, it was nearly 50 years ago, and it scared me stiff, and I can't promise I've achieved it, but this is what he said to me. He said to me, I'd like to try and help you with the answers, because when you're learning with a younger student, as we were all, I don't know if you have to do it here, when you're learning with a more beginner, he says, you realize that when you learned it the first time, you have to learn it well enough that you can teach it. Oh my goodness me, that's a frightening thing. I should know it so well that I can teach it, and that I can teach it in a way that screams at that person as well. Because I need to know it well enough that I understand it, and I only know that I understand it if I can say it over. And interesting enough, between Pesach and Shavuos, different people have different minhagim about the 48 ways to wisdom, the 48 kinyonei Torah. Interesting enough, I think it's Tosfos Yontov, or the Yochin says on that Mishnah, it doesn't say they're 48 milas HaTorah. It says they're 48 kinyonei Torah. They're 48 ways that you will acquire Torah. It becomes yours. Listen just a few of them. Halomed almanas lelamed. One of your kinyonei Torah is going to be, if you learn it well enough that if I was asked a question, I could explain it. I have to tell you a little secret. I was Baruch Hashem Zocher to run a big mosted for many years, but I didn't learn as much as I needed to learn. And since I've changed and I'm doing something which I've always had a great desire to do, which is to run programs for people who've already been through the process of becoming from and are trying to build their own families and homes. And one of the things I started doing is giving a Gemara share. I'll tell you a secret. Moshe Shapiro always used to tell me, I don't know if you heard, Zechel Salet Baruch used to teach it. He said to me, what you need, I was running JLE, he said, you've got to give a Gemara share. I said to him, I don't have time to prepare. He said, you've got to give him a Gemara share. You've got to teach Gemara. And all I can tell you is since I've been teaching Gemara, I've been learning Gemara. It's a whole different learn. Halavai, I'd be on the Madrega that I could learn full start. I'm working on that. But Baruch Hashem, I'm forced it. Haloimed amanas lelamed, v'aloimed amanas la'asois, hamachakim es rabbi. You make your Rebbe wiser by the questions you ask and the questions you ask. Because somebody who's active in Torah, it's not a passive experience, it's an active experience. You know, I mentioned at the beginning that Moshe passed on the Torah to Yeshua, and Yeshua passed it on to the Zakonim. Just have a little look at what happens when Moshe Rabbeinu is passing it on. And page 888, a very interesting whole idea about what's going to be. Just briefly, on page 888, Vaydaber Moshe Hashem le'mar, Yivkar Hashem lekeb aruchas l'chol basa ish eshoreida. Okay? The word Yivkod is going to be very important. Please see Rashi's on the beginning of this week's Sedra. But for the meanwhile, and he describes we need a leader who's going to go in front of you, who's going to go, somebody to take it, and the Jewish people shouldn't be without a leader, they have to have whatever it is. Says Moshe, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Moshe in Pesach Yud Ches, Vayem Hashem Moshe, Kach l'cha es Yeshua, the continuation, Bindun, Ish Asher Ruch Boi V'Samachtes, Yod Cholov, and put your hands on top of him, and whenever you give smicha, you're standing up because you're passing on a new generation. And when whatever, look at the next pasuk. Stand him up in front of Elazar. And you see the word is used a number of times. It says, Atem netzavim ayom kulchem. In pasuk Yutes, it says, stand him up. Atem netzavim ayom. You'll see, Rashi points out Moshe is going to die, and he gathers Klal Yisrael and says, you're standing here today. Passes it on to Yeshua. Rashi says on that pasuk, it's Atem netzavim ayom. It's a later Rashi on the same pasuk. He says, Atem netzavim. Whenever there's a changeover, generation to generation, you get everybody standing up and actively involved in the whole process. An extraordinary thing, because you're part of an ongoing process. You're standing up, and you're part of that journey. Now, many years ago, when I was running programs, we had a Friday night meal, and before we started the meal, we sort of introduced. I want to get to know the Talmidim a bit. So I said, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me a little bit about yourself. And this is for very much beginners, university students. And one guy said, this is my name, originally from South Africa, and then my family moved to Haifa. My father's a professor in Haifa University. He said, and this is my name. He said, but I just want to tell everybody here, I don't know much about Judaism at all. My knowledge is very, very basic, so please be nice to me, kind to me. He said, but there's one thing I remember learning in Hebrew classes. What was that? He says, the souls of every single Jew were together on Mount Sinai. So he looked at everybody there in front of him, and he says, I just want to say, since the souls of every Jew were together on Mount Sinai, it's really great seeing you here all again today. Guys, your neshamas were on Har Sinai, and you're spending your time in yeshiva reconnecting your souls and neshamas to Har Sinai. But what's happening on Shavuos is a Kabbalah, a receiving of Torah, where you're going to be standing. Standing so you can be makabel, and standing so you will know well enough that you can be part of a process passing it on. And being able to pass on Torah to the next generation is a very difficult thing. There was a Hachnasa Sefer Torah recently in England, and Rabbi Zimmerman, I've based in there of one of the Batei Dinim, spoke. And he pointed out very interesting halacha. Everybody has an achrayus to Mitzvah Hashem, write their own Sefer Torah. Whether you're able to do it or according to the Rosh, you can buy Sforim, but you have to write a Sefer Torah. Very interesting halacha. What happens if I was Yorish a Sefer Torah? I inherited it. Have I fulfilled my mitzvah of writing it? So he said, no, you ideally have to have your own, you have to write your own Sefer Torah. And he looked at everybody there and he said, because when it comes to Torah, you can't be Yerush the Torah. You've got to write your own Sefer Torah. And then he said, but make sure the words of that Sefer Torah are exactly the same ones of your father and your grandfathers. You've got to write your own Sefer Torah, and you've got to know how to put it over to you, your friends, the people around you, the next generation. You've got to know how to do it. But make sure the words are the same. You can't do the same exactly as your parents or grandparents do. Life's different, circumstances are different. But Baruch Hashem, an obligation you have to say. One of the Talmidim who were here in Ohr Somayach was somebody called Rabbi Roll. And he told me a story many, many years ago that he was a lawyer in Toronto. And Baruch Hashem, he was doing very well. He was offered to be a partner. But there was a part of him inside of him which made him think, I learned a bit in school and a bit in yeshiva, but I want to learn more. I want to learn more. And he was like fighting. Now, you should all be blessed to have panosas and be successful and Baruch Hashem. But he had a dilemma, like he was, and it was a clear dilemma. If he stayed in the law firm, it was a trajectory towards partner. He wasn't sure what to do. He had a Hasidic friend who invited him for Purim Suda. At Purim Suda, sometimes people say things and they, whatever it is, and the Chassid had a few drinks. And he turns to Rabbi Roll, who was then Yisrael, Ernie Roll, and he turned to him and he said to him, Mipnei Seva Tokum. Now, that's described in the Gemara and Kedushin in many different ways. One of them is when an old person walks in, you stand up. Another one is when a Zokin, when a Talmid Chacham walks in, you also stand up. And he's looking at Yisrael and he says, Mipnei Seva Tokum. So my friend's like looking around, thinking like, there's no old people hanging around here. Like, who am I supposed to be standing up for? In front of an old person, you're supposed to stand up. Mipnei Seva. So the guy's like looking at it. He's like, he's had a few lachaims. Obviously, maybe he's not looking as he should do. And again, he screams at it. He says, Mipnei Seva Tokum. And finally, my friend turned to this Hasidic friend and says, excuse me, but what do you mean? And he looked at him and says, before old age, get up. Before old age, get up. If you want to do things with your life, do it while you're young, because the older we get, the more complicated things get. Before old age, stand up. He heard very clearly the lesson that was sent to him. And he decided to stand up. Listen to that. They seva tokum, amida, nitzavim. And when we stand up, we become active partners with Rebbeinu Shalom, learning it to stand on our own 2 feet, and Mitzvah Shem helping the future generation stand on theirs. Big event. Have a wonderful Yom Tov.